Will Jesus know you? That's the most important question that we can ever ask. It's important that we know Jesus, but will he know us? Will he know you? Join us on this podcast as we examine Scripture through the lens of making sure that we will be known by Jesus. Thank you for joining us today on the Will Jesus Know You podcast with Jason Butler. Now, I'm going to start off this week with a question, and that question is, what is love? Or maybe we could say, what does it mean to love? You know, Jesus says the greatest commandment is to love God with all your hearts, all your souls, all your mind. But how do we do that? How do we love God? Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. Same question. How do we do that? How do we love our neighbor? Peter says, you must show sincere love to each other as brothers and sisters. How do we do that? Peter says, love each other deeply with all your heart. How do we do that? How do we truly love each other deeply? So if we're going to do any of these things that we're instructed to do, we have to understand what the word love really means. And I want you to think about some things that you love. What are some things that you would say you love? Maybe some people come to mind. Maybe a type or a style of food comes to mind. Maybe a hobby comes to mind. If you remember back in episode 4, I mentioned the word love. We talked about it in terms of how many Greek words have been translated down to one word. When we translate from Greek to English, we often oversimplify. We often lose some meaning. The Greek language has 8 different words that mean some type of love. And I kind of went through that. The point today is not to have a Greek lesson, but we take words like there's a family love, there's a friendship love, there's a husband and wife intimacy love. There's a word that means unconditional love. That's just 4 of the 8 examples. And we take all those and we dummy it down to one word that we call love. Again, don't worry, we're not going to go through all of those. I'm just trying to get an overall definition of love that's universal across all of them. So I ask you to think about some things that you love. So I want to tell you some things that I love. I love God. I love Jesus. I love my wife. I love my children. I love tacos. In fact, I love just about any type of Mexican food. I love golf. I love pizza. I love sports. I love spending time with my family. Those are some things that I say that I love, but the question is, can I possibly love all of those things? Now, the good news for us is that Paul defines to us what love is in 1 Corinthians 13. And we often call this the love chapter. In the first 3 verses, he sets the stage for the importance of love. Then he goes in verse 4 and starts defining what love is. So before he defines what love is, he says, you know, if I could speak all the languages of earth and of angels, but I didn't love others, I would only be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. He says, if I had the gift of prophecy and if I understood all of God's secret plans and possessed all knowledge, and if I had such faith that I could move mountains but did not love others, I would be nothing. If I gave everything I have to the poor and even sacrificed my body, I could boast about it. But if I didn't love others, I would have gained nothing. So Paul's basically said, I can be very eloquent in how I talk. I can be very smart in what I know. I can have all these great spiritual gifts from God. I can have God's special knowledge. I can have great faith. I could give everything that I have to the poor and sacrifice myself. And all these things are great. These are wonderful things, right? He says, I could have done all these great things, but if I don't love others, I've gained nothing. I've done all those other things in vain. So he describes the importance. We've got to know why it's important that we know love. We can do all these great things, but if we don't love people, we've missed the boat. So now he defines love starting in verse 4 of 1 Corinthians 13. And as I read these, I want you to listen to each one. These are all characteristics of what makes up love. And we have to begin to evaluate if we how we're doing with each of these characteristics that define love. First, he says, love is patient. Whew, am I being patient? Love is kind. So if I say that I love you, am I being patient with you? If I say that I love my wife, am I being kind to her? He says love is not jealous. It's not boastful. It's not proud. It's not rude. How are we doing with those? I personally don't struggle with jealousy, for example, but that one about being rude is hard at times for me. He says love does not demand its own way. That means that love is not selfish. When we demand our own way, we are being selfish. Love is not selfish. It does not demand its own way. He says love is not irritable. Oh man, how are we doing on that one? Who's good at never getting irritable at someone they say they love? Now here's one of the hardest attributes of love for me anyway. I don't know about you, but it says love keeps no record of being wrong. How many of us tell others that we love them? Well, we're actually keeping every record of being wrong, and we bring it up in the next argument. He says love does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. He says love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. And he says prophecy and speaking in tongues, speaking in unknown languages, and special knowledge will become useless, but love will last forever. So guys, earlier I asked you to think of some things that you love. And I said that I love tacos and pizza. But am I being kind to the tacos when I shove them in my mouth and eat them? Am I being patient with the pizza as I chew it up? I'm being facetious here, but obviously not. The point is that we have this word love, and we throw it around in many circumstances in our world when we don't even really sometimes understand what that word means. In our culture, it's an overused word. Love is an overused word. And it often describes a feeling or an emotion. What I'm getting out of something, if you're making me happy, if you're doing something that makes me feel good, if you're bringing me pleasure, that's what we call love. But when Paul defines love here for us, these things require thought. They require action. It's not just a feeling. It actually takes work. I want you to think about how many times we get in an argument with a spouse or one of our children or a parent or a friend, people that we say we love. We get into an argument with them. We have no patience, no kindness. We're rude. We're selfish. We remind them of all their wrongs, but then we turn around and say, I love you. You know that, right? Now, in my example, I've just been the exact opposite of what Paul says love should be. But I want you to feel this fake emotion of what we say love is, right? See, we have this one word, love, and we throw it around at things that we really can't love. I can't love tacos. I can't love pizza. I can't love golf. We throw it around at things we can't love, and we use it at times when we're simply not loving. When Jesus says to love God, I've got to ask myself, am I being patient with God? God has a plan for my life, and often I want to get ahead of God. I get impatient with God, if I were to be honest. So I have to ask, when I say I love God, am I being patient with God? Am I giving up my selfishness for Him, or am I demanding my own way? Am I being irritable when I don't feel like I'm getting what I need from Him? Am I getting frustrated and irritable with Him? Am I trying to keep up with a record of times that I think He's wronged me? Now, I want to be clear. It's impossible that He's wronged me, but sometimes we think God has wronged us. See, if I'm going to say I love God, then I've got to do an inventory. I've got to do an evaluation of how I'm treating God, or how I'm thinking about God, or how I'm talking to God based on Paul's definition of love. When Jesus says to love those around me, same thing. I have to evaluate. How am I treating others compared to this list that we're given here in 1 Corinthians 13? When Peter says you must show sincere love to each other as brothers and sisters, you must love each other deeply with all your heart. Now I've got to question not only if I'm following the love characteristics laid out in 1 Corinthians 13, but am I doing it with sincerity? That's what he asks. He says, you must show sincere love. Am I doing it with sincerity? Am I doing it deeply? For example, am I being patient and kind in a sincere manner? Or am I being patient and kind to manipulate someone to get what I want? If I'm only kind and patient with you to get what I want, then I violated the selfish part of the love definition. I'm not being sincere. Lots of people can act like they're being patient. Lots of people can act with a fake kindness. This is about a sustainable, true, sincere action or feeling. Peter has told us, as we go through this book of 1 Peter, the first chapter, he's told us to look forward to the perfect eternity that we have with Jesus. He told us to find joy in our suffering. He told us to be obedient. And now he tells us that a great act of obedience is to love sincerely and deeply. See, if I'm sincerely patient with you, if I'm sincerely kind to you, if I'm working on not being rude or not being jealous, not being irritable with you, if I'm working on forgetting how I've been wronged by you, these are great acts of obedience because I'm showing true love, not this fake emotion that our society calls love. If I can do these things that Paul and Peter tell us to do, or I should say, or not do. And what I mean by that is that sometimes when he's telling us what love is, he's telling us what love is not. So be patient, don't be rude. So that's what I mean when I say if I can do these things that Peter and Paul tells us to do or not to do, I'm actually living out the top two commands given by Jesus. And so are you when you live this out. A few weeks ago, I said, if you don't know how to be obedient, serve somebody. If you're looking for a starting place, just go serve someone. And today I'm going to add to that, serve and love. Serve and love, truly love. Start to evaluate if you're truly loving someone by these characteristics in 1 Corinthians 13. If we serve others and we love others like we're supposed to, that probably means we're being obedient to a lot of other instructions given by Jesus. Jesus says to be the greatest in the kingdom, serve. Jesus says that all the law, all the commands, all the instructions are summed up with two things: love God and love people. So guys, if you just serve and love, you're going to be okay with Jesus. That's the important thing I'm trying to get you to learn here. When you serve, when you love, make sure you're doing it with a sincere heart. Don't serve someone to be manipulative, to look good, to get something out of it. Serve them with a true servant's heart. Love them with true sincerity. We're not serving to be noticed. We're not loving to be manipulative. Remember, Jesus has said some hard things in the Sermon on the Mount, like love your enemies. And most of us, if we're honest, we don't have a clue how to love our enemies. How can I possibly love my enemy? I know it's a command from Jesus, but how do I do it? Well, now we got a better definition of love. Now, we can better define how we would love our enemies. It doesn't mean that I'm supposed to go snuggle up with my enemy. It doesn't mean that I'm supposed to desire to go hang out with my enemy. It doesn't mean that I'm supposed to be besties with my enemy, carve out quality time with them, buy them gifts, anything like that. Now I know that Jesus is simply telling me that I need to be patient with an enemy. I don't have to hang out with them, but I need to be patient. I need to make sure I'm not being rude or irritable. I'm sure if they're an enemy, they've done something to make me not want to be patient. They've probably done things that make me want to be rude and irritable. But Jesus is saying, be patient with them. Don't be rude. Don't be irritable. Jesus is telling us, forget the wrongs they've done to us. And sometimes we think that's impossible. But here's the deal. When we forget the wrongs that someone has done to us, whether it's someone we say we love or whether it's an enemy, we're actually forgiving them. We're releasing them. We're letting it go. And we know from other scriptures on the Sermon on the Mount that that's allowing God to forgive us. Jesus says, when you forgive, you get forgiven. So guys, do you see how all this is tying together? It's taken us several weeks to get here talking about obedience and serving and now love. But do you see how all this is tying together? Each week, some of these messages have been extremely challenging. Some of them have been encouraging, but some of them have been challenging. You know, Peter's talked about finding joy in persecution. That can be challenging and encouraging, but it's generally not easy. He's talked about being obedient. That's not easy. He's talking here today about loving each other sincerely and deeply. And let's be honest, that's not always easy. But as we do these things, we are living out the instructions that we've been given by Jesus. We are becoming more and more known by Jesus. You know, Jesus said, deny yourself, take up your cross, follow me. Basically, he said, give up your selfishness, get ready for some persecution, and do what I say. So when we memorize this list of love characteristics in 1 Corinthians 13, and we begin to evaluate how we're treating others by that list, and we begin to make changes in how we're treating others to truly love them, not just evaluating, but truly making changes, I believe we're walking out what Jesus is telling us to do here when he says, deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow me. So guys, this week, and hopefully forevermore in the future, think about how often you use the word love. Is it something you can actually love, or is it an overuse of the term? If it is something we can actually love, are we showing the true characteristics that Paul laid out? Now, to be honest, I use the word love too much, and I'm teaching this. Even as I teach this, even though I teach it to couples, I find myself using the word love too much. It's just sort of ingrained in us in our society. It's a word I overuse. And to be honest, it's a word that sometimes I look at the characteristics and realize I'm struggling to live out. I think we need to be honest with ourselves here. But I can typically look at like maybe 3 of the characteristics and evaluate how I'm doing. For me, it's, am I being patient? Am I being kind? Am I keeping a record of wrongs? See, all the characteristics are important, but I've learned these are my key ones, and you're going to have yours that stick out to you. It's going to be different for each of us to evaluate. What I'm trying to say by that is, like, I don't struggle with jealousy. I may have 20 or 30 years ago, but I don't struggle with jealousy today. But sometimes I struggle with being rude. I may not struggle with another characteristic laid out here, but I struggle with the irritability. I struggle with not being patient. My point is, as you go through this list, there's going to be things that stick out to you that you could say, I'm doing pretty good with those. But I got to work on this one. That keeping a record of wrong is like a 2 before to the face every time I hear it. However, it's getting easier as I try to focus on it and not keep up with records of wrong. See, all the characteristics are important. But you've got to figure out which are the ones that you need to work on yourself as I figure out which ones I need to work on myself. So the question is, do you want to be known by Jesus? Evaluate if you're truly loving people. Begin to change the way you treat those that you say you love. If you tell them you love them, are you being patient, kind, not irritable, etc.? Go through the list. And by the way, I guess I should say I really like tacos. I really like pizza. I really like golf, because there's no way I love them. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Please share this podcast with those you know so that we can make sure that each of us will be known by Jesus. If you would like to give to our ministry and support our continued ability to provide this podcast, or if you would like to purchase the book, Will Jesus Know You?, please see the links in the description. We appreciate your support, we appreciate your prayers, and we hope that you will continue to follow Jesus with us as we strive to be known by Him.